Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Late Night Brew, where we talk brews first and we get around to the business second. I'm Robert Buktenica, otherwise known as Buck, and tonight on the show with me, we have Hugh Roberts and our first returning guest, Lee Foster. Tonight, we're going to talk about Azure Information Protection, what it is, what it does. But first, the important bit, gents, what are you having tonight?
Mate, I have an Irish coffee. I need to get a little bit of energy going, and also from Australia, so an Anzac biscuit as well to have with my Irish coffee. Yeah,
digestive.
Yeah, exactly. Keep things moving. But I think Irish coffee is woefully underlooked these days. Lovely little nip, a little bit of pick me up. Love it. Yeah. Everyone's on the espresso martinis, but this is the future.
And Lee, are you drinking another martini this time around, or?
No, this time, in converse to the other side of the pond, I'm drinking a British tea with a nip, and my ginger nut cookie has been eaten by my 5-year-old. So I have a very tasty British tea with something special in it. So cheers, Buck.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Cheers,
I am drinking Juicy Jack. It is a local brewery, Santan, out in the Phoenix Valley. Juicy IPA. It is nice and citrusy, not super sweet. So it's one of those easy drinking beers as it gets hotter, but it's not like a lager where you down it and you're like, I could use a little bit more water after that.
But I think you need a shelf behind you, so that each one of these where we discuss what we're drinking, you can have on there the last can that you drank, so we can see all those cool craft beers you have coming out of your neighborhood.
Yeah,
good idea. That's a good idea. I'll have to see if I can work that in.
What's your shirt say, Buck? Why don't you read that out?
It is Tap That AZ.
AZ, is it? How do you, if you pronounce the AZ together, what would that sound like?
As.
I do. So thanks for going there, Hugh. That was gold.
Yeah, no worries.
Someone had to. All right, gents. Azure Information Protection. What is it? What does it do?
I'll take that. So Azure Information Protection is a technology from Microsoft that really helps you, assist users in classification and protection of data. So while it's not just assisting users, it's also automatic classification and enforcing things. One of the main use cases that we see is giving the users ability to protect their own information as it comes to light. So that's one component. The other component, it mixes really well with something called data loss prevention as well, which is a technology to hopefully stop users accidentally sharing the wrong information, outside the business as well.
Yeah. So we've got the protection. We've got a little bit of, hey, let's make sure this doesn't keep this doesn't leave the environment if it shouldn't. But that's only half the battle. The other half is, how do customers know what they have, what data exists, who has what, and who has access where?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's two things. One there with AIP. You can also use it to find out what data you have. People have thousands and thousands of unstructured files with no knowledge of what's inside them and where they reside. And then the other point that you mentioned as well, which is who has access to what, is not normally solved by AIP, but solved by something else. Lee, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, for sure. Great question, Buck. Look, it's one of the biggest problems is exactly that, right? It's first off, the ultimate goal is, how do I protect information and stop information leaving the organization, and how do I control sensitivity and access and everything else? But the first bigger question is, who has access to what information, and more importantly, why, right? So we do work with, Buck, I don't know if you're familiar with an ISV out of the UK called Torsion.
I've heard of them.
Yeah. So Torsion's role, quite simply and high level, is it effectively plugs into the 365 stack. It appears within things like SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. It gives you a security understanding, so straight out the gate, people can understand the security status of a site. But the biggest thing it does by far is when people share, to Hugh's point, once information starts getting shared around, instead of the share button within, say, Teams or SharePoint, where you can just share with whoever you like, it adds a lot more smarts as to around the questions asked of an individual when they try to share information. So the button gets replaced with a share with Torsion button. And when they click that, it effectively says, you want to share this with Buck. Why do you want to share it and for how long? And then it will check things like Azure Information Protection, classifications and labels to see if that share is even legitimate. Should I be sharing this information? And the last point I'll make is it makes it very powerful in teams when you have people in a team that should or shouldn't be in a team, where there's files that sit behind that team in SharePoint that say 8 out of 10 people in the team should see, but 2 shouldn't. It'll pick up that security and deal with that security for you.
Awesome. Yeah, that's those two definitely work in pretty good concert. And especially with the modern new norm that we've seen really in the last 3 months. Remote working, Teams is getting, I mean, for lack of a better term, it's getting thrown out there in the wild. Organizations are throwing it out there. All of a sudden, it's a remote workforce. And I mean, protection of data, now that you have so many different devices potentially getting into your network and everything, is huge. And protecting it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I think Microsoft had a statistic that they had in the last few months, 300% of their anticipated Teams adoption. So what's happened is, business have thrown it out there for remote working, but it comes with a whole heap of risks, right? So things like, accessing files from your home computer, data being moved into new places like Teams, like OneDrive, like SharePoint. So, and they're all interconnected, obviously. And Azure Information Protection, covers all those products, which is really good. Sorry, go ahead, Luke.
I was going to, mate, that's just a mad statistic like that. The stat that you just said, if you translate that into users, Buck, I think I saw something that said in beginning of March, there were 23 million active Teams users. And by the end of April, or beginning of May, it was 74 million active users. With over 300 million Teams meetings being held a week globally. So that's just the scale of which, to Hugh's point, the scale at which people have moved to that remote working new normal.
Yeah, and not only that, but they're accessing on like unprotected devices at home. They're using mobile devices, all sorts of stuff that may not have the same protection that you'd have on a work computer sitting in an office.
Yeah, and that's where that protection becomes, I mean, more important than ever. Of you never know what to use, your point, Hugh, what malware or potential vulnerabilities that device carries. And I mean, AIP has it where you can set it, hey, if there's no internet access, you can't open this file. That file has to be able to check in with Azure to make sure whoever's trying to open it can. So I know Teams gives so much power and ability to share, not just within an organization, but with guests and external access. All of a sudden, that kind of stuff is really important because someone might throw up a file in a Teams that's got some external guests, and you don't know what they're doing with it.
100%.
Yeah, so I think one of the other critical pieces that AIP helps with is identification of where that data is residing. So with the E5 SKU, and there's 2 SKUs to AIP, right? You get your E3, which is more manual classification. You can, assist users by assigning a default label, for example, to stuff in that SKU. Yeah. And then you have the E5 one, which enables automatic classification of data across your environment. So a lot of people are realizing that automatic classification is something that may be required in certain environments, certain high protected environments and highly governed environments, or even environments you're going for a certain security classification for, like an ISO or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was going to raise. Like, any use case, like a PCI compliance use case. Yeah. They find everything that relates to PCI and automatically label that and then deal with the false positives.
Exactly. Yeah.
It sounds like, I mean, between all of this, it really requires like the holistic strategy of not just what data do we have, but Torsion, where is it? Who has access to it? AIP classification. We have a whole lot of confidential data that's sitting on an open SharePoint share. What's up with that? That's such a huge question that a business could be able to answer with that. And
yeah, for sure. Like you think of AIP, information protection, data loss prevention. It's all about people and process first, right? The AIP and DLP, they're control mechanisms, which before you can define meaningful policy or even begin to enforce a meaningful policy, you got to Hugh's point earlier, you got to understand what your people are doing, where they reside, what normal looks like. Are those locations trusted? Are the devices trusted? What processes do they follow and use? And use whatever tools you can, or tools, some of the tools that we've mentioned to give you those insights. Because without that, you kind of come at the problem backwards. You start to create policy and start to define labels that can effectively hinder productivity.
Hugh, I mean, you've definitely been working in AIP for probably far longer than I have. What would you say is a healthy approach for real high level how businesses should handle like this kind of rollout and this kind of a monumentous task to take on?
Yeah, good question. There's approach we've developed now called the crawl, walk, run strategy, which is not, I guess, an approach we've developed, but it's something we've defined as steps that can be taken to roll that AIP in a controlled, meaningful way that can be tweaked as you move along, implements the correct logging and analytics at the start so that you know what's going on with your AIP deployment, and then you can refine as you move forward. And it deploys it in a way that's not disruptive, to users in the beginning. It will become, as users start to use it and get trained and you get more insights into what data you have, can become more beneficial and sometimes disruptive, but sometimes disruptive in the right way as well. So because sometimes disruptive is the right thing. We don't want people sending stuff outside the business when they don't, and they shouldn't be doing that. So I guess we've kind of defined these steps so that we can really take a look at how we can holistically deploy AIP in a controlled way. And also, there's a couple of other things we should mention as well. It's not just about AIP normally for a business.
Right.
It's also about identity. Is the other correct pieces in place as well? Do we have a overall data governance strategy? Like, do we have policies on how and where we store data? What is removable storage allowed to be used? All those sorts of high-level policies that we need to have a policy for, I guess, that can also, build on your governance strategy and make sure you've got a holistic view and picture.
That's probably a whole other episode of getting into like the Microsoft Zero Trust model of how to really secure that holistic entirety of your business and how, you can do it best and how Microsoft helps you and all that good stuff. But that Zero Trust, take care of every piece of that business, process, users, identity, all that good stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. So that should be considered as well. And then, integration to other products as well. Like, things like shadow IT assessments are super important for data protection as well. Make sure you don't have other solutions being used out there that's not being protected by, your AIP and data loss prevention policies. So there's a whole heap of things to consider when doing these type of rollouts. And that's why we've developed this kind of easy to follow methodology.
But shadow IT is a good point too, Hugh. And we talked earlier about using the tools to give you those insights and get the information that you need to make meaningful decisions. Torsion is one such tool. Shadow IT, MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security, the assessments that can do to give you line of sight to Hugh's point, what is actually leaving the organization to sanctioned or non-sanctioned SaaS-based platforms or storage platforms. That's usually really insightful. And in my experience working with DLP over a number of years, albeit with a different vendor, you find that the shadow IT piece and visibility there drives a lot of the business case to all of the things that Hugh's just raised, right? And to get the line of sight and get the commitment to solving the overall problem, it's the insights that drive the meaningful decisions.
Right, and I'll take the moment. Let's take that second to define shadow IT, because I mean we use it pretty regularly. We're comfortable with it, but others might not know what it is. So could you give a real quick high level, what exactly is shadow IT and why is it a concern? I mean, really?
Yeah, for sure. So it comes in two parts, right? The shadow IT and shadow data. Shadow IT really comes from in its early inceptions, and people will definitely relate to this in sort of DevOps space, where, you know, when AWS came along and early days of Azure, you had your DevOps people working and they needed quick access to workloads. They couldn't get that from the typical infrastructure teams. The infrastructure wasn't available. They put their credit card into AWS, buy an instance, spin it up and start developing code. Now immediately that proprietary code is now out there in AWS, and we all know that AWS has had a number of breaches, as of other cloud platforms, right? So shadow IT as a whole, that's where the term comes from. People using other people's equipment, not their own, and bypassing internal systems. But a direct byproduct to that is the second part, which is shadow data. So we use code in shadow IT. If you think of users now saying, you know, I need to collaborate with Buck and Hugh, my internal systems are clunky. You know, if I have to try and share it on a file share, I've got to get access to these guys to use it. It takes too long, and by then, you know, my opportunity on my project's finished. So I'll just stick it in OneDrive, my personal OneDrive or Dropbox or Box or something external to me, and just send them the link. Same problem exists. I've now taken some internal proprietary data, maybe some sensitive data that AIP would now not see, or any DLP product wouldn't see, because it's now been placed external to the organization, right? So shadow IT and shadow data are normally innocent behaviors as a result of people trying to bypass internal inefficiencies, right? But the risk that poses is usually significant. So by exposing what exists as far as IT and data outside of the organization, you're showing or proving that the problem exists. If that exists externally, then there's got to be issues internally, and people are bypassing for a reason. Now we need to understand why that is. What's the process that's broken? And let's go address that, to Hugh's earlier point. Does that help?
Absolutely. I think that's a phenomenal overview of it. It doesn't leave much for questioning. So, gents, thank you very much for your time, your knowledge this evening. It's been a pleasure as always. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're here to help. There will be links. Please reach out. And otherwise, have a great night and have
Cheers,
some
bud.
great drinks. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, bud. Go tap that AZ, bud.